have the answer prepared.
Don't worry, we want to hear your original answers. So, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Seher Tariq, and I am delighted as a non-youthful person to be hosting this webinar on International Youth Day, thanks to Jinnah Institute. आज का जो हमारा topic है, we thought that we would collect some people who were not too long ago youthful and have some experience to reflect back on what it is to be a young person in Pakistan and to share some wisdom from that perspective on International Youth Day and talk about some of the challenges and some of the jugards that you can employ to succeed in Pakistan as a young person, both professionally, personally, in your intellectual pursuits and your creative pursuits. So joining me today, I have a very, very fun and smart and exciting group of people that I'm going to introduce to you, and then we'll jump into the discussion. We have Ramsha Jahangir, who is a journalist. We have Ahmar Naqvi, who is a writer on cultural affairs, including music and cricket in particular. And then we have Sabah Banu Malik, who is also a journalist and also an RJ and also a comedian. And then we have Asad Rahim Khan with us, who is a lawyer and a columnist. So welcome everyone, and thank you for giving us your time and hopefully your wisdom. The only rules for today are that you have to be very honest in all your answers. Because I think people really want to hear an honest conversation about negotiating space in Pakistan as a young person. So आज की हमारी दो themes हैं जिनके बारे में we're going to talk about. One is resilience and one is rebellion. So I'm going to kick off by asking all of you कि कोविड का ज़माना है, वक्त बड़ा मुश्किल है, हालात अक्सर पाकिस्तान में और पूरी दुनिया में ख़राब रहते हैं. So what are you doing, or what would you recommend that young people do to stay sane in the face of this? Are you staying sane, and if so, what are you doing to stay sane? Ramsha, going to kick off with you first. So what are you doing? Are you sane, and what are you doing to stay sane?
I'm not sane at all. It's actually very difficult, and especially in my profession. I think the best thing to do is to disconnect this time. There is a lot of information out there. Even like there's a lot of confusion, information, misinformation, a lot of things, and you have no idea what to do. The world doesn't know what to do, how to deal with the pandemic. And being a young person, you're not so used to being locked in a room. You want to go out. It's very difficult. That itself is a challenge. But I think also being a young person, we're very tech savvy and we know how to work around and pass time. So I think the first thing is disconnect if you can. If you're not a journalist, you're super lucky during this time. Disconnect from, go for a tech detox, and try to minimize your access to the news and information. And I think shortlist like three credible people in your list, and only trust them to pass on credible information to you. Besides that, don't read news. And the second thing to do is try to do more things that don't involve screens, because I think in lockdown, being locked in a room where our screen time has massively increased. So I think try and do things like maybe read books if you're a book reader, start planting. That's something I've started to do in during lockdown. Listen to music, basically try and disconnect from screen. So that's one way of keeping your sanity balanced. But yeah, it's very hard. It's a tough time.
Agreed, it's a tough time. Emma, you're someone who sort of really enjoys the internet, lives on the internet. You've recently started a YouTube program on cricket as well. So are you disconnecting from screens, or are you immersing yourself more in them in this time?
अब मैं पहले जो आपका जनरल सवाल था कि एज ए पाकिस्तानी यंग पीपल किस तरीके से ऐसे मुश्किल वक्त से गुजर रहे हैं, और जैसे कि जो लॉन्ग डिस्टेंस रनिंग है तो उसमें ज्यादातर जो वर्ल्ड रिकॉर्ड होल्डर्स और चैंपियंस आए हैं वो आई थिंक कीनिया या किसी ऐसे अफ्रीका में एक मुल्क के एक इलाके से सारे आते हैं, और वहाँ बहुत हाई एल्टीट्यूड है और लोगों को बड़ा दूर चलना पड़ता है, तो पीपल जेनेटिकली देयर आर जस्ट लाइक दे बेटर एट लॉन्ग डिस्टेंस रनिंग। तो सिमिलरली जो दुनिया के तमाम मेस्ड अप चीजें हैं, तो उसमें पाकिस्तानीज आर ऑलरेडी द लॉन्ग डिस्टेंस रनर्स ऑफ दैट। मतलब कि अगर अभी दुनिया के ऊपर एक कयामत आ रही है, तो आप लिटरली जब से पैदा हुए हैं उस वक्त से कयामत से गुजर रहे हैं, राइट? लाइक इफ आई जस्ट टेक माय ओन एग्जांपल, यू go from like born in Karachi in the 90s और ऑपरेशन हो रहे हैं, और फिर 9/11 होता है, और फिर terrorism and climate change and earthquakes and crashing economy and whatever. So मतलब एक सेंस में अल्लाह मियां ने जो है पहले से ही हमारा वीडियो गेम हार्ड लेवल पे रखा हुआ था। तो अब अगर मतलब कोविड भी चल रहा है, तो हाँ बेशक, मतलब जैसे रमशा ने जो बातें की कि आप अपने जो जितनी बेहतर रूटीन्स बना सकते हैं हेल्प्स टू स्टॉप यू फ्रॉम गोइंग क्रेजी, बट अगेन लाइक जो खवातीन सुन रही है ज्यादातर, वो उनकी तो बहुत सारी औरतों का पाकिस्तान में पहले से ही लॉकडाउन पेंडेमिक से पहले चल रहा था। तो अगेन मतलब कोई हमारे मुल्क में हम पहले से ही ट्रेन थे इन सब क़यामतों के लिए।
That's actually, I think your that's a good point that you made. So Sabah, ये जो सारी कयामतें हैं from all sides, what are you doing to deal with them and stay sane?
Sorry, that really made me laugh. It's good I was on mute. That's so true. I'm actually with Ramsha. I wrote a couple times, ironically, using tech about how I enforced a tech detox. Because again, journalists, like, first of all, journalism was dying, and then we got a pandemic, and now it's kind of like a new breath of life into our careers. Like, honestly, like, I'm grateful that I'm able to work and I'm able to do that work from home. But home is no longer a sanctuary, obviously, because the whole house, alhamdulillah, got to work, and now we're all at home. And I had to do a tech detox because there was just no way to disconnect. And I've done the cliches, though. Like, I have a time every day where my phones are off. I will not look at them. I barely watch TV anymore. I don't watch the news anymore because I'm like, I am the news. So I'm just going to have to trust myself on this one. And it's again, it's just the cliches of like taking care of yourself and understanding. And so I've actually even stopped reading books at a certain time during the day because I'm like, stop absorbing information. Just be dumb, be cute, go stand outside, talk to no one, and just take some silent time. And as for staying sane, I honestly, I don't know. I said things similar, Amr. I've not lived in Pakistan my whole life. I moved here about 7 years ago. So majority of my close friendships have been through a phone. Like, I've been on WhatsApp. Like, that's how I stay connected to people. So similarly, I feel like I was trained for this. I know what it's like to not talk to people in person that you want to. And yeah, basically.
All right, Asad, over to you. What are you doing?
Yeah, my mic was on mute. In terms of keeping sane, so as Ramsha said shuru mein, I don't think I was sane either in the beginning. You feel that the walls are closing in, and then you start talking to inanimate objects. And when that started happening, so I thought ke ab aadmi bahar jaye, routine switch up kare, farak cheezein kare, and I think that made a difference. Dusra, I think this is going to sound like a Hallmark card. Like, one thing that this taught me was that human connections are probably the most significant thing that you have going for you. So if you can have 2, 3, 4 people jinse aap baat kar sakte ho, either on a day-to-day basis or on a week-to-week basis, that also keeps you grounded. In terms of overall कि जी पाकिस्तान के हालात ही इस तरह के हैं, sure, but you are where you are and it is what it is, and you have to actually take it one day at a time. What you do with that time is probably what's going to make the difference in terms of your general sanity. तो ये बहुत ज़्यादा general बातें मैं कर रहा हूँ. 2, 3 things that helped was, one was routine, changing up routine. The second was talking to people who understand you on a consistent basis and you understand them. तो जिस तरह circumstances भी तब्दील होते हैं, वो आपको ground कर सकते हैं. और तीसरा ये है कि बेशक बाहर आग लग जाए, तबाही और बर्बादी हो जाए, and this might be following on from something that Sabha said, you can actually stand outside and say, okay, I'm still here. So let's see what happens tomorrow.
While you stand outside.
Yeah.
We also have Kef Ghaznavi, who's just joined us. Thank you for joining us, Kef. Kef is both a performing artist and a teacher. And we've asked everyone, what are you doing to stay sane during lockdown? So are you staying sane, Kef? And if you are, so what's the secret to it?
Adab everyone. Can you all hear me? I hope my mic is working now. Okay, great. So I think that the pandemic did not affect me in a very conventional way, because I was at that time serving as the head of department of media sciences with ICRA University. So I had 5 campuses under me with a total number of 5,000 students who were enrolled in the media sciences, where we were in the middle of the semester and we had to be on a war footing with how we're going to take all these lab courses online, and especially with no equipment, the state of the art equipment which the students had access to initially. So I think that kind of played a very important role for me to kind of get engaged with how to look into ways of how to basically have solution for our youth to keep on studying, and also taking care of their mental health also, because at one point the coming to the university was their way of meeting friends. The university culture was there, और वो फरार हासिल करते थे क्योंकि मिडिल क्लास ज़्यादा है और लोअर मिडिल क्लास ज़्यादा है इकरा यूनिवर्सिटी में। तो बहुत सारा बच्चा था जो रूरल एरिया से फरार हासिल कर कर हमारे पास आया था और कुछ बनने की ख्वाहिश लेकर आया था, और उसको फिर घर बैठना पड़ा विदाउट प्रॉपर इंटरनेट एक्सेस. So there was a lot of counseling also. I saw myself, I mean, I know teachers are counselors as well, but this was the first time in my entire career of 15 years of teaching that I had to play a role of a psychiatrist also, a psychologist also, a mother, a sister, to all gender of my students. And all, I mean, there were many genders in our university. So it was really interesting to see how we could help them out. And so those 3-4 months kind of took that toll. And in the middle, my husband's from Mirpur Khas, and we saw a lot of disparity and a lot of chaos in that small town of Sindh. And we realized that there were people who whereas we can talk about, I mean, for me, when I went to Mirpur Khas with my husband and saw what was happening there, I thought my world was very utopian and a very elitist world where I had food, I had access to good water, I had access to house, a home, my family. And then there were people I saw who had no rozi roti, jo rozmarra ke kamane wale log the. So we decided to venture out into the field with this 1-year-long project where my husband's paintings were being sold, and then we were buying rickshaws and thelas and सिलाई मशीन वगैरह, इस तरह की छोटी छोटी चीजें जिसमें लोग एम्पावर हो सके, क्योंकि आप कितना खिलाओ किसी को, एक हद तक ही आप खिला सकते हो ना, आप खुद भी थक जाओगे, आप एग्जॉस्ट करोगे अपनी जो भी आपकी ट्रेजरी होती है घर की छोटी सी. तो वी डिसाइड, और उन्होंने लेने से भी इनकार किए पैसे, बिकॉज दे सेड हम खुद कमाना चाहते हैं, हम लोगों की इज्जत नफ्स पे ठेस पहुंच रही है जब आप हमें रोज आकर 3 या 2 पहर के खाने दे रहे हैं. तो वी डिसाइडेड कि हम एंटरप्रेन्योर्स क्रिएट करें, छोटे छोटे लेवल पे एक कॉटेज इंडस्ट्री को क्रिएट करने की कोशिश करें. तो फॉर मी द पेंडेमिक बिकेम अ वेरी engagement with the society. I was engaged with them पहले भी because मैं cultural festivals कराती हूँ, but ये engagement बहुत different level की थी. It was at the grassroots level. It was listening to these people and trying to access their problems, which I will never be able to access from my own home here at the sea view, जिधर आपको समंदर भी नजर आ रहा है और आपको सनसेट भी दिखता है, आप सनराइज भी देख सकते हैं, और आप कहते हैं कि वो बहुत मेरे दिल को सुकून पहुंच रहा है, मुझे मेरा कट ऑफ हो गई हूँ मैं दुनिया से। पर ये हमारी सोसाइटी है, ये हमारी 80% ऑफ दीज पीपल मेक आवर सोसाइटी, और इनकी ही जो यूथ होती है वो हमारे मुआशरे का एक तब्दीली निज़ाम बनती है। क्योंकि इनमें से लोग नहीं उठेंगे तो फिर कोई नहीं उठेगा, हम लोग तो नहीं चेंज ला सकेंगे क्योंकि हमें उनकी असल प्रॉब्लम्स पता ही नहीं है। तो दैट व्हाट वी डिसाइडेड to I mean, I'm still not savvy in that. My husband comes from that background, so he understood more, and so I think I kind of became like an apprentice to this whole 1 year long project. And then of course the education was also going on, so for me it was more or less that way of quarantining / not quarantining.
No, so you've obviously been very busy, but I think you've touched on a very important theme that we want to explore. I think one of Jinnah Institute's missions is to create a more egalitarian, a more equitable society for everyone, regardless of where they come from. So one of the themes I wanted to talk to all of you about is जो एक बहुत glaring चीज़ है पाकिस्तान में, वो obviously inequality है, जो कि young लोगों को बहुत तरह इफेक्ट करती है। बहुत सारी चीज़ें हैं जो आप अपनी प्रिविलेज की वजह से कर सकते हैं, जो कि बहुत सारे बच्चे शायद नहीं कर सकते। जिस तरह कैफ आपने कहा कि लोगों के पास इंटरनेट तक नहीं है, सो एक्सेसिंग थिंग्स लाइक वेबिनार्स, ऑनलाइन सेमिनार्स उनके लिए पॉसिबल नहीं है। इवन व्हेन इट कम्स टू थिंग्स लाइक एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप, उसके अपने बहुत चैलेंजेस होते हैं जो कि आपको निगोशिएट करने पड़ते हैं, जो कि हर कोई शायद उस तरह नहीं कर सकता। सो one of the things, I think there are two important things that I wanted to ask. One, Ramsha, first I want to ask you कि especially COVID में और आजकल के ज़माने में internet connectivity has become such a basic human need. It is especially for young people, क्योंकि अब पढ़ाई भी इंटरनेट पे हो रही है, बिजनेस भी इंटरनेट पे हो रहा है, काम, हर चीज़, this has become sort of a hub. What are some of the challenges that you see in Pakistan when it comes to connectivity? Because you write about this, this is your area of research and work. So can you outline for us some of the challenges and if there are any possible solutions जो कि state को करने चाहिए, लोगों को करने चाहिए, what needs to happen?
डेफिनेटली इंटरनेट एक्सेस की हमारे यहाँ बहुत ज़्यादा डिस्पैरिटी है। फॉर इंस्टेंस, जब से कोविड हुआ है ऑनलाइन क्लासेस शुरू हुई हैं, गवर्नमेंट ने भी काम चैनल लॉन्च करेंगे एजुकेशन के लिए, लेकिन द इग्नोर्ड सेक्टर बलूचिस्तान, फाटा, गिलगित बल्तिस्तान में देयर वाज अ हैशटैग मूवमेंट एंड प्रॉपर कैंपेन जो चली उन स्टूडेंट्स ने कि हमारे पास तो इंटरनेट ही नहीं है, हम कहाँ पहाड़ में ऊपर जाकर मुश्किल से तो हमारा फोन के सिग्नल्स आते हैं, तो हमें इतना हाइक करके ऊपर जाना पड़ता है एक फोन सिग्नल के लिए, तो ऑनलाइन क्लासेस तो लेना हमारे लिए बहुत दूर की बात है। और ये वो स्टूडेंट्स हैं जो स्कॉलरशिप स्टूडेंट्स थे, लाहौर में यूनिवर्सिटीज में स्कॉलरशिप पे पढ़े थे, दे हैड टू गो बैक क्योंकि कोविड लॉकडाउन वगैरह हो गए थे, उनके पास इंटरनेट नहीं है। तो ऑनलाइन क्लासेस एक अच्छा सोल्यूशन भी था कोविड में, बट देन इस कंट्री में इट वोंट वर्क because this is even in Karachi there were a lot of students जिनको मैंने इंटरव्यू किया, कहा कि हमारे घर में honestly we're very privileged to have can pay for good internet, but वो भी इंटरनेट कनेक्शन कितना, क्वालिटी ऑफ इंटरनेट भी बहुत खराब है, बार बार डिस्ट्रप्शन होती है उधर, they can't even afford। वो बता रहे थे कि 500 से लेकर 1000 रुपीज के वो इंटरनेट पैकेजेस खरीदते हैं मोबाइल के, और वही सारे उनके पैसे लग जाते हैं, फिर भी इट्स नॉट इनफ द बैंडविड्थ ऑब्वियसली कि वो ऑनलाइन क्लासेस के लिए उसको अफोर्ड कर सकें। तो एक्सेस का इशू है कि कुछ एरियाज में अभी तक इंटरनेट एक्सेसिबिलिटी नहीं है, 3G 4G टावर्स नहीं है, देयर आर लॉट ऑफ पॉलिटिकल एंड सिक्योरिटी रीजंस। अभी गवर्नमेंट ने कहा भी है इसके ऊपर एक्शन लेंगे एंड वी विल रिस्टोर इंटरनेट, बट नो प्रोग्रेस हैज बीन मेड सो फार। The second thing is affordability, which applies to the larger geographical unit of Pakistan. वो कराची में भी है, वो फाटा में भी है। And the third thing is also in training of technology. I mean, a lot of us, हमारे पास phones तो होंगे, टीचर्स ने सबसे ज्यादा ये बोला कि हमें तो नहीं आता ऑनलाइन क्लासेस करना, या हमें नहीं आता, मतलब there is no training, there is no investment। तो ये भी बहुत इशू है कि द क्वालिटी ऑफ एजुकेशन इज कॉम्प्रोमाइज जब क्वालिटी ट्रेनिंग नहीं होती है और इन चीज़ों को इन्वेस्टमेंट नहीं होती। अब वो एजुकेशन का चैनल में रोज चेक कर रही होती हूँ, इट्स मोस्टली वो ट्रांसमिशन नहीं चल रही होती। आई मीन आपने अनाउंस तो कर दिया, बट इट्स अ चैलेंज टू इवन कंडक्ट एनीथिंग ऑनलाइन या टीवी पे, बिकॉज टीचर्स आर नॉट यूज्ड टू दिस मेथड। तो वहाँ पर भी the quality training is also missing. So these three factors have impacted education, which I feel मतलब अभी going forward COVID तो रहना है, and दूसरे मुल्कों में भी I mean online classes हो रही हैं, but हमारे लिए it's a big challenge and it's very alarming कि आधे से ज़्यादा लोग उसको access नहीं कर सकते और कितने सारे पैसे लगा रहे हैं इस unemployment के environment में where people are losing jobs. उनको ये टेंशन है और फिर another thing is कि जो service providers internet service providers they're not also offering cheap packages. ये तो बोल दिया कि हम आपको अनलिमिटेड दे देंगे, हमने bandwidth बढ़ा दिया है या 15% bandwidth बढ़ गई है consumption, PTA ने कहा during the pandemic, but the point is आपने affordable नहीं किया package को, and this is the time when people need more internet. तो वो भी एक चीज है कि internet providers should also think about it, the PTA should think about it, and yeah, these are the issues that they need to come up with solutions for.
Great, thanks. And जो दूसरा एक issue which Kaif mentioned was about, you know, around entrepreneurship, around being able to be self-sustainable. बहुत से young लोग सोचते हैं कि वो अपना एक खुद से business start करें, कोई नया venture शुरू करें, क्योंकि obviously jobs की supply पाकिस्तान में उस तरह नहीं है. And I think economic growth and economic equity also is very, very important for any nation to succeed. Now, Emma, I know you have been part of a venture that was sort of an enterprise that launched from the beginning, and then you kind of left it as well for lots of reasons. So can you share with us, and for other people who are watching, who are thinking of maybe going down the entrepreneurship path, what are the risks, challenges ये लोगों को करना चाहिए? Are you going to launch another business venture, or are you never doing it again? What have you learned from that experience? Oh, Amber, you're on mute. We're going to have to unmute you.
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead. I was saying that, I mean, I think Pakistan may, at a very general level, the entrepreneurship space is very exciting because you've got a population that has very rapidly using the internet. There's a lot of increasing smartphone penetration, etc. That being said, one of the major problems you face in entrepreneurship, for example, with us when we had a music service, is that there's not a lot of infrastructure that exists. So when you really move into, like, unlike in other economies where the digital space is really people who are disrupting well-established industries and offering some new efficiency to it. In Pakistan, both the good and bad thing is that you really have, you're really starting off from square one. तो उसमें आपको कुछ फायदे होते हैं कि you can grow really quickly, और obviously बहुत बड़े challenges होते हैं that you're doing everything on your own. अभी भी जो सबसे बड़ा मसला यही है कि online payments, which we keep hearing that they're doing something about it, but that remains just जो सबसे basic आपका stumbling block है. But I feel it's very important to also note, and I see this problem a lot, is that there's a great lack of ambition, not just in the entrepreneurial space. I feel that in a lot of spaces in Pakistan, but खासतौर पे जो entrepreneurs जो अभी तक digital space है, वहाँ ज़्यादातर focus है of making like these clones or, you know, a Pakistani version of an already existing famous app, etc., which is great, but it's also, you know, not really catering it to local markets, or not really bringing a lot of innovation to it, or kind of being satisfied with a certain level. So I feel that's somewhere where the thinking is, oh, it's Pakistan, and, you know, as I just said myself, baki infrastructure nahi hai, this, that, and the other. And I feel we set our our goals a bit too low, our standards a bit too low. I feel that there's actually a lot of space for growth. And as I said, in my own experience, that was something that we discovered. So for example, when it comes to copyrights, it was just conventional wisdom that is impossible to enforce them, and they're too much of a hassle, and it doesn't happen. And no one, you know, major global corporations operating in Pakistan would also not adhere to copyright laws. But once you actually get into it and start adhering it, a lot of things fall into, at least in my experience, fell into place for us. So what I'm trying to say is that I feel that we often sell ourselves short in terms of what is possible. So I don't want to underplay the difficulties of that challenge, but I think that's something that's really important, and that can come from like mentorship and better policies, and at least some, the state doesn't have to be encouraging even, but it can stop being hostile, particularly in the digital space. If those things happen, definitely it makes your life easier.
And so
But
would you say that you need to, like, people need to solve difficult problems in order to be
I
successful?
think that's the only sort of problems you have in Pakistan. Like यहाँ पे, you don't have those problems that, especially right now when it comes in the West, the kind of complaints people are making about the curtailment of their freedoms, etc., because of wearing a mask, whatever. Like I think Pakistan made, even if you find an easy problem, will very quickly become a difficult problem.
But
So
as a young person, I mean, who's trying to set up or solve a problem, how do you, was it challenging getting access to capital? कैसे पैसे इकट्ठे किए बिजनेस स्टार्ट करने के लिए? अम्मा अब्बा ने डांटा था कि नौकरी क्यों छोड़ रहे हो, पागलपना कर रहे हो, ये क्यों कर रहे हो? Like, how did you manage that? Was it easy, or was there like a real, like, just tough time for a while?
access to capital है एक सबसे बड़ा मसला है, और मेरे ख्याल में, मतलब, I mean, obviously, I am lucky to come from a privileged background, and so the people that kind of set it up, so they're all university educated and corporate jobs, etc. So there was access available to still some level of money, right? But I find that if you're operating the digital space, or you're operating the creative space, और आप बाकी ममालिक के लोगों से जब बात करते हैं, तो उनके पास तो मतलब एक पूरा बुफे है, और you have the same two options that you have to work with. So obviously it becomes difficult, but मेरी नजर में, I think that that's really the way we should be going. And what I mean to say is that a lot of times, people come up with something and they just level out at that space and don't really go beyond that. And that's something that I find, that's why I find upsetting. But I also wanted to give an example of my sister who's set up her own business, who's 10 years younger than me. So is actually young, unlike me. And it's a product called Zonanos for hair oil and dry shampoo. And she had basically access, she saved up her own money to put the seed capital for it, took a little bit from her parents, and has learned a lot of things on her own. And one of the things that she has discovered is that, because particularly there's a lot of growth in this space, there's a lot of freelance, like illustrators and designers, and people working in marketing, and people who are like, she's working in a shared workspace and made a lot of contacts that way. So I think she's a really great example of what is possible for young people in this country. But as I said, obviously privilege plays a huge role in it, and until we start addressing these things at an institutional level, there's only so far that most people can go.
Fair enough. Asad, so I think you are in a profession, you are a lawyer, and you're in a profession that's adopted by people across the socioeconomic spectrum. So you have people from all levels of society becoming lawyers. Do you think, would you encourage people to become lawyers, is question number one. And question number two is, if you don't come from a lot of privilege, if you are sort of saying, okay, मुझे वकील बनना है क्योंकि उससे एक अच्छी नौकरी मिलेगी, I'll have a steady income. It's not the entrepreneurial path. It's the more, एक नौकरी है, मुझे कहीं नौकरी मिलेगी, monthly paycheck मिलेगा. What advice would you give to people to succeed in that? Or are you still hostage to your privilege, even in that?
No, I think you are definitely hostage to your privilege, and those tensions become a lot sharper when you have something like the law. सबसे पहले तो I'll come to the privileged segment, because I think their problems are maybe not as broad or as serious as the rest. वहाँ भी काफी मसला है, especially if you're a woman. And there have been so many horror stories in which आपका JD है Colombia से या कहीं और से, and you go and you interview with a law firm, and the senior partner says something along the lines of, well, what is your utility? You have no utility for me. Now, one gentleman actually said कि जी जो मेरा driver है, वो he provides me a better service right now than you as a fresh graduate can. And this is forgetting the classist overtones of a statement like that. अगर आप इससे आगे बढ़ के भी देखें, तो the stuff that we usually say to women lawyers is, well, number one, when are you getting married? Number two, are you getting married? Because we want to slot you into a division of labor segment जिसमें हम maximum काम आपसे निचोड़ना चाहते हैं, और फिर उसके बाद, we're going to say, maybe it's time to ease you out. So the first thing is that if you're a woman, there are massive problems here. Obviously, वो थोड़े से कम हो जाते हैं if you're privileged, but even as a privileged woman, it gets difficult. With privileged men, well, obviously not. Privileged men are on top of the heap in every single segment. It helps if, dad's a judge, or even better if your father-in-law is a judge. That's like, फिर तो. But if you're coming from a big lawyer family, and this is a strange trend that we're seeing, which is that law firms, which are essentially units in a service industry, उनको भी अब हम इस तरह तस्वर कर रहे हैं जैसे ये कोई सीमेंट प्लांट है या कोई टेक्सटाइल मिल है कि ये या तो पापा की प्रिंसेस को जाएगा या मेरे बेटे को जाएगा, and so on and so forth. This is something else to inherit, and it's taking away from what this profession is. It's part of the service industry. You're supposed to give people advice. If you're doing things really well, then you also fight for the fundamental rights of people who can't. So there's that. So ये हो गई जो सारी वो privilege वाली बात थी. जो non-privileged वाली बात है, that is, I think, where the situation gets really, really stark. And what we've created is a bunch of law colleges which churn out lawyers. उधर regulation नहीं है. Regulation इसलिए नहीं है because our bar associations think that these are constituencies. And the more people we make lawyers, the more people will vote for us. तो क्योंकि regulation का मेयार इतना कम हो गया है, basically anybody can get an LLB. And there's a lot of people from my age group who will say things like, oh, law school was the hardest thing I ever did. या वकालत जब मैं पढ़ रहा था रात के 4 बजे तक मैं उठा रहता था. And I'd be looking at them and thinking, it's not easy, but it's also not that difficult. It's not that difficult to become a lawyer in this country, but it's next to impossible to actually succeed at it on a consistent level if you're coming from a certain economic segment. Uska solution kya hai? Number one, our bar associations actually need to start regulating. Also, I'm sorry, Seher, I know you said to keep it light and bright, and we're getting into some really technical aspects, but the bar associations need to, I think, start regulating ke lawyer ko kis tarah aana chahiye. The second element is there needs to be a greater culture of mentorship, and I really lucked out in terms of having someone who was able to protect me from a lot of impediments that you come up against. But my experience is not the general one. The general one is that mentorship ka yahan kafi boran hai, and people treat associates, regardless of what university you're from, in a very transactional context. Okay, bhai, this is a horse. I'm going to get 14 hours of work from him. And then after he's done or she's done, it's probably best to put them out to pasture without actually saying कि आपकी ये laddering prospects हैं, आप ये चीजें कर सकते हो, and I actually believe in you, which, although it's impossible to think, but someone who's 21, 22, 23, 24 really needs to hear, if not on a regular basis, आप साल में एक बार कह दो, some sort of Amitabh Bachchan line, and maybe they can actually go the distance after that. It does change how they work. The third thing is, I do think we need to be more aware of हमने जो बीच में एक बहुत serious किस्म का class divide खड़ा किया हुआ है, and it's across the board. So most of our lawyers that are then parachuted into the high court, they come from Lincoln's Inn or they come from foreign universities. आपकी जो vast अक्सरियत है litigation की, वो शुरू और खत्म होती है at the first court of institution, which is your civil court or your criminal court. All the lawyers you see on TV don't go there. All the cases that reach the Supreme Court are 0.0001% of those cases. So जो vast majority है, चाहे वो cases के हों, चाहे वो lawyers हों, चाहे litigants हों, they are operating on a plane that most of us haven't heard of. And as a result of that, most of us aren't interested in. Last technical thing that's directly linked to a lot of land litigation. तो आप जब तक अपनी ये जमीन के झगड़े डिस्प्यूट्स उनको या तो आर्बिट्रेशन के प्लेन पे नहीं लाएंगे या उसको कंप्यूटराइज नहीं करेंगे, एनीथिंग दैट बेसिकली लोअर्स लिटिगेशन टू डू विद लैंड टाइटल, तो आपका जो बेसिक जो अभी सूरत हाल है वो उसी तरह चलती रहेगी. सो to cycle back to your question, I think you need a bar association that actually regulates its lawyers. I think you need to be a lot more class conscious of people who don't have those privileges afforded to them. And I think you really need to fix your lower courts. And in terms of young people who are entering this profession, I think they really have to fight it out right now. And I hope when inshallah they get at that stage where they're able to help younger people, so they will mentor them in ways that they themselves were not. So off the top of my head, I'd say these things.
Awesome. Thank you, Asad. Now that you have fixed the legal system for us and told us what we need to do, I think जो बात तुमने की about mentorship, I think that resonates with me a lot as well. When I started my career in Pakistan very early on, it was actually with the Jinnah Institute, and I felt I gained a lot from the mentorship I got at Jinnah Institute from Sherry Rahman. And it was interesting because Pakistan में और बल्कि पूरी दुनिया में you're often told औरत ही औरत की सबसे बड़ी दुश्मन होती है, and women don't let women come up in the world, right? And so we build, especially for women, we build all of these toxic and negative stereotypes around them. If as young women you want to succeed in your career, you want to succeed, what are you supposed to do? Now, Sabah, I know you consistently on Twitter, you are battling the patriarchy. You and I do stand-up comedy together also. So I know through humor, you are also not just battling the patriarchy and men, but some of these stereotypes we have about women and about in our culture. What do you think? Like, what are some of the things that, you face on a regular basis from your trolls and from people? Like, what are some of the when you talk about women and when you talk about letting women be independent or come up in their careers, what's some of the stuff that you hear and what are some of the intelligent answers that you give back? Can you give us some so we can also start treating them?
I like how Amir's laughing. He's like, I've read her answers. They're not that intelligent. It's mostly gifts of me being like, and what? Actually, I just wanted to add to what was said before is I do speak a lot on women's rights and stuff, and I was going to say that my activism has been a point of sanity. I do consider it activism. I'm one of those people. But there's a lot of privilege, right? Like I'm protected in this space. I have no one stopping me from talking about it. So I was going to latch on to what everyone else said about the privilege that's attached to being a student, that's attached to going into business, even into law. There's also this privilege about getting to be an activist who can talk out loud with their face, with their name, and put their politics out there. And really, actually, I would even tie this into the pandemic. So a lot of women are now who used work, right, as almost a refuge. I mean, you deal with a lot of crap at work, of course, because you're a woman who left the house and that was your first mistake. But when you're now locked at home, there's all these added things which have now become that you're now basically servicing your home on top of maintaining a job, on top of trying to maintain your sanity. And I'm not saying you weren't maintaining it like your home before, but now it's 24/7, there's eyes on you and there's really no breaks. And I feel since COVID started, a lot of that conversation has obviously come onto Twitter. Twitter seems, at least for some people, to be a bit of a sanctuary where they can come and say, like, this is not right. As a woman, this does not feel right. And then you get the trolls who are just like, well, what do you expect when men are expected to make money? And I'm like, I don't know what economy you live in, but everyone is expected to make money now. Look, I come from a privileged house, but if I stopped working right now, my life would drastically change. That's why I'm so grateful I work. Anyone from work who's watching this right now, I'm so grateful I'm working. Thumbs up. I'm good. I'll work 24 hours for it. And so dealing with trolls is, I mean, you're combating really, and I hate this word because I don't always know if it's fair, but you're combating a culture in a lot of ways that's just like, this is what a good woman is, and this is what a bad woman is. And I'm not saying that when I worked abroad or I studied abroad, I didn't experience harassment. Again, when you go outside, it's pretty much in some cases like you're going to get it 50-50 chance in a day that you're going to hit with it. But working here, the level of harassment I faced was unreal. I felt like I was in like a television show, like Law and Order, something like that. It was ridiculous. And I think that now you've brought all that anger online, where it's like, if you're complaining about what happens to you as a working woman, your first mistake was to become a working woman, because a good woman doesn't work. And that's something that you have to challenge in Pakistan constantly. And I'll remember, my first year at Auric March in Islamabad, I was there both as a protester and as a reporter. I like to do 2-in-1s, cross 2 things off my list. And I was there, and one of the women I spoke with, so there was a whole sort of lobby. I'm not sure if lobby is the right word, but there was a community of people who were domestic workers. And they came so that they could talk about their rights and like what they face. And a woman said to me on camera, we have it over at my news, that I am forced to work. And because I work, I come home and I'm told, you're a bad, like, all her character is slandered. Like, and I was just staring at her like, this woman doesn't get to touch any of her money, right? Like, she's purely put out as someone who's putting to the bank of the family, and then is called a slut for doing it. It's incredible. So when you say like, what kind of troll comments I get, I mean, a lot of them is calling me like a burger auntie, because, it fits the stereotype. I guess it makes sense. My Urdu is terrible, and I love burgers. And I live here where being a liberal woman is not that hard. But a lot of the comments I get, they're basically around that of like, well, then you should leave, or like, well, this is what a woman is. And I don't know, most of my comments are just, I try to do this thing where I comment first, I'll go with like calm, rational, let's, have a discussion on why this doesn't make sense. That never really works out, because they just kind of get angrier and angrier. And I noticed the one way that I want to say boys, honestly, sometimes I go to these profiles and I'm like, I'm not sure that you have left O levels yet. But a lot of the comments are like, well, what about your dad? Or like, what about your brothers? And I'm like, yeah, what about them? They can suck sometimes too. And you have to call it out, because it is ingrained in us. I mean, I grew up abroad, and from when I was a child, I was like, when I'm 22, I'm just going to be married and do nothing else. Like, that's what you're ingrained in. Like, there's a certain way that good women wind up. I'm not saying that's the way it's in every home, but I'm saying it is. So that's how I combat them. And then if that doesn't work, we go for using GIF reactions. There's a very good one of Zendaya where she's like, that one I like to use a lot. One time a man fought me on that and was like, well, this is pathetic that you're fighting with GIFs. So then I had to send them like 10 GIFs. So they knew I was pathetic, but I was armed with my patheticness, So yeah, I hope I answered your question, but yeah.
Awesome. And I think you're touching on a very important point, which brings us to the next part of the conversation, which is, rebellion. As young people, often there is this desire to rebel against the system, to have your voice heard. Or Pakistan mein humne recently dekha hai that there are more public forms of young people expressing themselves. Chahe wo Auric March ho, student march ho, chahe wo online hashtags ho, which start trending. There are different ways in which I think young people are trying to make themselves heard. Now, Kaif, because you work so closely with young people from across the socioeconomic spectrum, ये जो जैसे हम देखते हैं, things like an Auric March या a student march, are these just elite phenomenon? Or are they happening everywhere? Are people from other parts of the country finding other ways to express themselves? Because I think open expression, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, sort of all of the ideals in which sort of Pakistan was grounded, or what, August 11th abhi guzra hai, which was Jinnah Saab's speech about freedoms and all of that. What do you think young people are really, how are young people making themselves heard? Are young people generally rebelling, or are they mostly conforming? What do you find amongst your students?
Well, I think young should rebel, and that's what he or she is there for. They're the ones who actually have a very fresh take on what life should be like, what culture should be like. और जो कि हमारा सोसाइटी का तरीक़ेकार भी है, हमारा नहीं, खैर पूरी दुनिया में ये तरीक़ेकार है कि हम अपने यूथ के ऊपर चीज़ों को थोपते हैं. हम समझते हैं हमारा नज़रिया अच्छा है. मेरी बेटी 2.5 साल की है, मैं उसको इतनी दफ़ा नो कह चुकी हूँ कि वो पहला लफ्ज़ जो उसने सीखा है वो नो सीखा है. तो अगर मैं उसे कुछ कहूँगी तो उससे सबसे पहले मुझे कहना है नो मामा, बिकॉज दिस इज व्हाट आई टेल हर कि नो आंबल, डोंट डू दिस, डोंट डू दैट. तो उसने एक अथॉरिटेटिव पोजीशन को इतने यंग एज पे अपना लिया है कि अब वो आगे जाके मैच्योर ही होगी, और उसको मैं रोक नहीं सकती, उसको मुझे रोकना चाहिए भी नहीं. लेकिन फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच का जो कॉन्सेप्ट है ना, वो बहुत रिलेटिव होता है. हम ये नहीं कह सकते, मैं ये नहीं कह रही कि मैं आई एम नॉट नेगेटिंग द मूवमेंट्स, देयर वंडरफुल, दे शुड बी देयर, द इज़म्स हैव रियली to a lot of people they've been great carrier torch, एक वो है लाइमलाइट है जिसमें वो अपने आप को मनूवर करते हैं. लेकिन जो ये सब चीज़ें जो होती है ना, जिसमें आप अपने आप को कुछ अपनी बात कहकर आगे अपनी बात को मनवाते हो, या अपने घर के अंदर या अपनी सोसाइटी के अंदर चेंज लाते हो, ये हम सबके लिए रिलेटिव है. आपके लिए कुछ और होगा, असद के लिए कुछ और होगा, रमशा के लिए कुछ और होगा, सबा के लिए कुछ और होगा. तो वी आर ऑल वेरी, बिकॉज वी कमिंग फ्रॉम डिफरेंट बैकग्राउंड्स. हमारी एक आर्काइव है जिससे हम चीज़ों को वो करते हैं, पिक करते हैं और उनको फिर अप्लाई करते हैं सोसाइटी, या नहीं अप्लाई करते, डिलीट कर देते हैं और उनको नई चीज़ों को हम लेकर आते हैं. जो अहमद जिस तरह से कह रहे हैं कि वो तो अब इस जनरेशन में वो इनोवेशन मौजूद ही नहीं है, डिजिटली भी नहीं है, वैसे भी नहीं है, क्योंकि हम लोग हमेशा से इतनी, हमें आदत हो गई है, हमारे निसाब में भी वेस्टर्न कल्चर को इतना मुंजमिद कर दिया गया है, ऐसे घुसेड़ दिया गया हमारे अंदर कि मेरी बेटी जब कहती है ना वाओ यमी बर्गर फ्राइज, लेकिन जब मैं उसको बर्गर फ्राइज खिलाती हूँ तो वो मुंह से थूक देती है, बिकॉज शी डजंट लाइक द टेस्ट ऑफ इट. पर वो एक वक्त आएगा जब उसको उसकी आदत हो जाएगी और वो वाकई में उसका वाव वाव बन जाएगा. बट देन इट्स टू लेट बाय दैट टाइम टू एक्चुअली अंडरस्टैंड कि उसकी यूनिकनेस जो है, इंसान की अपनी यूनिकनेस क्या है, और उसने ज़िंदगी को किस नज़रिए से देखना है. तो जब आप औरत मार्च की बात करते हैं या स्टूडेंट मार्च की बात करते हैं, ये उन लोगों ने शुरू किए जिनको किसी ना किसी सिस्टम में कोई चीज़ गड़बड़ नज़र आ रही है. और यूथ चूंकि रिबेल करेगी और उनको नज़र आ रहा है कि मेला सजा हुआ है, लोग वहाँ पर इंजॉय कर रहे हैं, तो एक ख़ास किस्म की यूथ वहाँ पर जाके खड़ी होगी. मैं आपको एक बड़ा सिंपल सा वाक़या सुनाती हूँ. मैं बिल्की सीधी के साथ बैठी हुई थी, औरत मार्च को गुजरे कोई हफ्ता हुआ था, एंड बिल्की सीधी बहुत नाराज़ थी. मैं साड़ी पहन के गई थी और उन्होंने पहले ऊपर से नीचे मुझे देखा, उन्होंने कहा कि शीमा क्या लगती है तुम्हारी. मैंने कहा मेरी उस्तानी है वो, मैं उनसे डांस सीखती हूँ. तो कहती हैं औरत मार्च के बारे में तुम्हारा क्या ख्याल है. मैंने कहा बहुत अच्छी मूवमेंटें होनी चाहिए बिल्की साहबा, आपको इतना गुस्सा क्यों है. तो कहती हैं मेरा जिस्म मेरी मर्जी का जो स्लोगन है ये किसको वारा खाता है. मैं इस वक्त खारा धर में ऐसी औरतों को लेके बैठी हुई हूँ जो स्ट्रेचर पे मेरे पास आती हैं मार खा के अपने खावंद के साथ, जिनको सड़क पे फेंक दिया होता है मार कर खावंदों ने. और मेरे सामने ही हुआ, एक औरत इसी तरीके से मिन्नतें करी थी कि बिल्की साहबा मैंने तलाक नहीं लेनी, मुझे वापस जाने दें अपने खावंद के पास. हालांकि उसी खावंद ने उसको मार कर फिजिकली अब्यूज करके इतना बुरा मारा था कि वो स्ट्रेचर पे ही दिया थी. तो वो उन्होंने मुझे कहा कि मुझे बताओ तुम खारा दर की किसी भी औरत को उठाकर जो बुरके में खड़ी हुई है, तुम मेरा जिस्म मेरी मर्जी समझा सकती हो. और मैं उस वक्त चुप थी, ऑब्वियसली मुझे नहीं समझ आई थी कि मैं उनको क्या जवाब दूं. अपनी जगह मूवमेंट बहुत अच्छी है औरत मार्च की, लेकिन इंक्लूसिव नहीं है. बहुत सारी मूवमेंट्स एक्सक्लूसिव हैं, ज़्यादातर एक्सक्लूसिव हैं. तो हम इंसान भी खुद भी एक्सक्लूसिव ही हैं. मैं अगर औरत हूँ तो मैं मर्द को नहीं आने दूंगी. मैं शायद अगर मेरे अंदर तासुब है तो मैं ट्रांसजेंडर को भी धुतकार दूंगी, गे को भी, होमोसेक्सुअलिटी को भी बुरा भला कहूँगी अगर मैं रिलीजियस हूँ बहुत. तो ये बहुत सारी चीज़ें जो कि आपस में ना बैरियर्स क्रिएट किया हुआ जिन्होंने, जिससे हम एक्सेस ही नहीं कर पाते असल में मसला क्या है। अब आपने जिना की बात की, मुझे बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग हिस्ट्री हमारी तो खैर बहुत गलत तरीके से हमें पढ़ाई गई है, जितना भी निसाब में इस वक्त बड़ा कंट्रोल्ड हिस्टोरिकल कंटेंट और बड़ा गलत और झूठ हमें पढ़ाया जाता है। लेकिन बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग जो चीज़ है जो आज तक नहीं बदली, जिस पे जोश आ जाता है लोगों को, वो है वो नारा कि पाकिस्तान का मतलब क्या, ला इलाहा इल्लल्लाह। इसमें मजहब कहीं पे भी नहीं था, इसमें ना आप सोसाइटी की बात कर रहे थे, ना आप, एक नारा था जिसने जाके लोगों को, एक स्लोगन का पावर था जिसने जाके लोगों को पकड़ लिया था, एक इस पूरे खित्ते को, इस पूरे ईस्ट इंडिया के खित्ते को उसने अपने एक अम्ब्रेला के नीचे कर लिया था। बाद में जो भी डिवाइड एंड रूल की वजह से हम लोग अलग अलग, लेकिन जो सारे थे, एक नेशनलिज्म का कॉन्सेप्ट बीच में जागा था। And you know, there were a lot of talk about exercising your right, exercising the freedom to say something, the freedom to be, the freedom to live. ये मुझे लगता है कि आज की यूथ जो है ना वो भूल जाती है कहीं, क्योंकि उसको कभी उस तरफ एक्सेस ही नहीं दिया जाता। आप रिबेल करें, लेकिन आप किस चीज के लिए रिबेल कर रहे हैं? क्या वो लॉन्ग रन में, क्या आप सिर्फ हार्मोन्स के ऊपर रिबेल कर रहे हैं, या आप ऐसी बात को लेकर चल रहे हैं जिसने एक्चुअली ग्राउंड बनाया हुआ है, जिस पे आप कुछ अरसे तक खड़े तो रह सकें, ना कि वो नीचे से लैंडफिल भी नहीं है उसके अंदर, रिक्लेम्ड लैंड भी नहीं है उसके अंदर, और वो बह जाएगा, एक लहर आएगी और उसके साथ आप बह जाएंगे। तो मुझे लगता है हमारे यूथ को यहाँ पर भले रिबेल करे, लेकिन सोच समझ के रिबेल करे कि आया कि वो चीज़ लीगल भी नहीं कहूंगी, क्या लफ्ज कहूंगी मैं, इज इट इंटेलिजेंट रिबेलियन और इज जस्ट रिबेलियन फॉर द हेक ऑफ इट, कि मजा आ रहा है।
So let me ask all of you a question. Please raise your hand. How many of you would classify yourselves as rebels? One hand, two hands, three hands. Excellent. So Amar, you know, how are you a rebel and how are you rebelling, and what do you think is the place of...
I just wanted to actually address something that Kaif had brought up. She gave and I feel as a man, I'm not the right person to go too deeply into this. So I'll invite one of the women to take it up from here. But you know how you mentioned that there was an older uh, activist who felt that the Auric March was too exclusive. Firstly, like, I mean, having been involved, have known people who've been involved with it. The Auric March in Karachi went out of its way over each of its years to really include not only working class women, but working class women from different ethnicities as well as religious backgrounds. And I think what I wanted to talk about, and it's something that young people today face quite often, and particularly even like what we term as millennials, who are not necessarily young anymore. The old guard in Pakistan has been pretty terrible, and it doesn't matter if they're liberal or they're conservative. Um, they've been super reactionary, and I think the Me Too movement is a great example of it in Pakistan, where whether it's the liberal end or the conservative end, they've really refused to accept that this is a problem. And when the crescendo reached the great deal, there was all of this like clutching of pearls, ke, oh, what's going to happen and how is this going to be done, and not enough outrage on the fact that men of power were abusing that power and abusing human beings for so long with impunity. And in most cases, those men are still in power, but also that the people who should be holding them accountable, whether it's the organizations they run or the events they hold or the positions that they're invited to, उनमें कोई भी change नहीं आया है। और यहाँ पे मतलब एक चलें ठीक है, and I obviously Kaif, I was not what you were saying, I was referring to what you talked about, but I was using that to talk about a more general thing. So it's not a personal attack at anyone, but I've just generally felt that, when it's come to, for example, one thing that caused a lot of outrage was this poster saying like, don't send dick pics. And the outrage was that why are women in public talking about dick pics? And like, I mean, this was people from quote unquote liberal whatever backgrounds who believe women empowerment is that forcing women not to wear burqa or something. I don't know, but like it's been extremely disappointing for even people of my cohort who are not necessarily very young. And I think much younger people, like I'll take the example of place I know, Lums, where for the last 20 years or whatever, we're taught everything that's taught in the Ivy Leagues, and we're supposed to know all those scholars and be able to quote them, etc., etc. But when the students demand that those standards be applied to the same institution that's teaching them, then all of a sudden, there's, oh, but what about due process and what about this and what about that? Even though you're still taking classes where they're telling you that this is how institutions fail people, etc. So I feel that's there's personally, I really come across this age divide, and I think every generation has an issue, but perhaps because of the internet and technology, the last 10-15 years I've seen perhaps a greater amount of flux. And I feel there's a big responsibility from people who from older generations who were the people whose generation got us into this mess, and B, need to realize that the times are changing and their way of looking at the world has moved on. Just because they were liberal in 1980 doesn't mean that they're still liberal in 2020. And so they need to update that, system inside them, because that's consistently one of the biggest issues that young or youngish people in Pakistan face, where there's very little accountability of those at the top of at an older generation.
So, Sabah, I know you've been involved with the Auric March also, and I think the Auric March has sort of become this flashpoint. Everyone has an opinion on it. People get very, but I also kind of want to use it as a moment. The Auric March or the Student March or whatever, they've become these moments where you see a lot of creative expression also. चाहे वो posters हो, like Emma said, and some of them are even very benign. Like अपना खाना खुद गरम करो पे बहुत शोर मचा था. How dare you say? So, what do you think about these creative forms of expression or creative forms of rebellion?
The poster, like no dick pics or stop sending dick pics, that's actually the first conversation that I had at length about Auric March with my nani. I'm sure she's not going to love this being on the internet. And I was like, unsolicited genital photographs is how he broke it down. So I didn't have to say dick 50 times in front of her. But it was actually incredible because she fully got it. I mean, this is someone who literally, I'm 30, and she was like, have you thought about finishing school? So this was a very big moment for us where she understood it. Meri Jism Meri Marzi almost caused like atomic levels of issues in my home. But the issue that's right there is Meri Jism Mera, whatever, Mera Jism Meri Marzi, my word is bad. But it's like, you guys immediately jumped to sexual autonomy and you got enraged, right? Like, I mean, the amount, if you want to talk about trolling, my account during the Auric March days is like, I've had 600 notifications at one point. I'm not that special, 600. Weirdly, a lot of them calling me Modi, which I was like, I don't think he's like a women's right campaigner. I just think you needed to tell a Pakistani something that would hurt their feelings. But I think that I would actually say, earlier we talked about the complacency in the youth. I think I see that a bit more, honestly, in the elite structures who kind of benefit from things not changing, right? Because they're going to inherit money. They're going to inherit, in some cases, law firms and law degrees and courts. And in some cases, they're going to be okay. And you see a lot of them being able to start businesses, and it's okay if they fail because they have a net. What Auric March and the Student March, and honestly, the marches we're seeing all over the world. In Pakistan, on any given day, I promise you, we know this. There's so many journalists sitting here, but we know there's a protest happening, and we know that the numbers, a lot of them are of the youth. I agree. A lot of creativity came out of that, and I think a lot of the kids, I'm sorry, I'm talking about like also 20-year-olds, but a lot of them are just, I think, done with it. And when I was at Auric March, I found, these are kids who are leading the charge. I did not attend Student March here, I wasn't covering it, but the creativity that came out of it, I think, is awesome. And yes, in some cases, it can be read by, say, my nani or an older generation as vulgar. And I agree with Amir that what's vulgar is that that it's happening. that it exists, that it's such a part of our everyday, that 1,000 men, women, and children can stand and march, and a large majority of them can show you their phone and say, this is being sent to me, or I'm being harassed, or, and it's not funny and it's gross. And I think that was great. Now the khana khud garam karo. Why did everyone lose their minds? Because they know that it happens in their house. Like they're like, there's bigger issues. Okay, well, bigger issues is that when we go outside, I'm sorry, I'm about to say a trigger word, like there's a very high risk of rape. Now, if we mention rape, why are you talking about rape out of the house? Now, I understand these are patriarchal structures that have been layered for generations. I mean, our nanny's age, our parents' age, our generation, in the 30s and in your 40s, you've experienced things, and the way to cope was to be quiet and to not say anything, because you might not have found support somewhere. Maybe you were scared. A lot of it is you think it's your fault, right? Like a lot of us know this now. Thankfully, a lot of education is being out there. So when we have young people coming out in their jeans and their t-shirts and they're saying, like, enough is enough, I think it hits a lot of nerves for people who maybe didn't have the platform to do it before. Now they're seeing this happen, and it's unraveling things. And I mean, not to like put my family's entire business out there, but Auric March really allowed for conversations to happen, which were upsetting. That women in my family in their 60s were like, you know what, I can honestly relate on this, and I never talked about it before. I hope I'm answering your point. I just get so excited about talking, I start rambling. But it's that I think that that's what these youth or these young people are doing, is they're saying like, listen, we can be proud and we can be Pakistani and we can criticize the fact, like we said, this old guard maintains these structures of respect, that if you're a morally good kid, a morally good person, you're going to shut up, listen to what you're told, and follow this path. And I think now you have all these kids being like, I don't want this path of silence and pain and trauma because it's going to make, Eid easier on everyone. And I think that's the kind of thing that's happening. And so I actually give mad credit to them, and I follow them, that they're out there and they're doing this and they're fighting against. I mean, so many people I know who went to Student March and Auric March, not that I know personally at Student March, that's a lie, but Auric March personally snuck out to get there. You know what I mean? Like they literally went like this. And I think the argument, we can't adhere to sensibilities to get things done. Like that's not how things get done. Like you have to be loud and creative and grab attention. And I mean, Auric Marches in Pakistan is a globally recognized thing. You'll see it pop up on the page of all these cool millennial websites who are covering it. And I think you have to give credit to where it's due, and it's because of those posters. So yeah, I hope I had a point. I don't know.
No, so I think that's a really good point. Sometimes you do need to shock and awe to start a conversation. And I think young people in Pakistan have been doing that. Chahe wo internet pe ho, chahe wo sadkon pe ho, you are sort of using this shock and awe tactic to begin conversations. Because the thing that people should be upset about is that there are people out there sending women these pictures. There are people out there sending women rape threats and death threats, right? Rather than being upset about how तुमने ये बात क्यों की और ऐसे नहीं कहना चाहिए, अच्छी लड़कियां ऐसे बात नहीं करती. So there is, I think, slogans like मेरा जिस्म मेरी मर्जी have galvanized a debate जो पाकिस्तान में पहले नहीं हुई. And some of the older activists, etc., were not able to capture the imagination of the public in the same way that these new methods of resistance have captured sort of the public debate. And so Asad did not raise his hand when we talked about who's a rebel. So I'm going to come to you in the end, Asad, but I want to ask Ramsha first, because you raised your hand for being a rebel. What do you think about this intersection of, sort of voice and online space? क्योंकि बहुत सारी जो अब demand hai for justice or demand for rights, conversations, they've become online. But we've also seen that some of them can become, they can become unproductive. They can become bullying. People get harassed. Just today, women journalists, of who you are also a part, have released a letter about how women journalists are particularly targeted online with harassment. So do you think the online space can help young people amplify their voice? Is that a safe space? How can young people use online spaces to voice their legitimate demands, whether those are, about their fundamental rights and freedoms?
Firstly, obviously, it is the method of amplifying voice in the age of social media. And I don't think there is any social media platform which is not being used for activism. And this is like where our relationship with technology, I mean, it's always going to be there. So I think credit goes to social media for amplifying different voices, for giving everybody the space and the opportunity to voice their concerns. But if it is a safe space or not, that is obviously debatable. I don't think it is. Specifically, if you're doing activism on Twitter, it definitely is not. And it's a very, very, very difficult choice to make, to be vocal on Twitter. आपको trolling होगी, आपको abuse भी face करना पड़ेगा. आज हमने statement निकाली है चीज के ऊपर कि trolling नहीं होनी चाहिए. उस पे भी हमारी trolling हो रही है. जिस चीज को हमने call out किया है, replies में वही चीज वापस से हो रही है. We're facing more and more of it. तो ये एक बहुत important और difficult choice आपको लेनी होगी. Auric March में, like Sabha mentioned, she had to face what hundreds of notifications. So चीजें viral होती हैं, and then they'll dig up old tweets, and there will be a lot of personal harassment that you will have to face. But that said, it doesn't stop you from amplifying your message. It doesn't stop you from sending that message out. हम troll हो रहे हैं, लेकिन the message is out. At least the world knows that this is what our problem is. This is what our concern is. So I think it's a two-edged sword, and you have to make your choice. You have to. It's up to you. Basically, it's also, and there are days recently only where I'm all for social media. My work is all about social media, but I chose to go offline because of the harassment I was facing. It became difficult. Anything I would say would be taken out of context or anything like that. I had to make that choice for my mental health. But then on other days, I have to fight back, for instance, today, because it's a larger cause. And I also feel that without these few voices who have the courage to take these issues to mainstream media, you can't raise them on a bigger you can't raise them on a bigger level. So you have to balance it out. You have to make that choice. Or is tarah safe hogi? But activism, I think social media is great as long as we have access to social media and it's not blocked. Because in Pakistan, that's a very important concern, and there's a lot of silencing and twisting of platforms. That's another debate. But as long as it is there, I think we should make the most of it. And I think, yeah, we're the hashtag generation.
Asad, so you said you're not a rebel. And there are many people out there who are not rebels, but I know that you support a lot of good causes, and you support a lot of people's rights to, freedom of expression, etc. So I would also like to say even though I go to the Auric March, I'm trying to rebel these days. I've never been much of a rebel my whole life, right? Like, मुझे बड़ा मुश्किल लगता है authority के खिलाफ rebel करना. मुझे बड़ा मुश्किल लगता है to be, the troublemaker. I've never been the troublemaker. I'm always Miss Goody Two Shoes. So, and I said, you look like a Miss Goody Two Shoes too, a Mr. Goody Two Shoes. So how do people like you still manage to have impact or manage to voice your concerns about things that bother you or raise your voice? Do you just not raise your voice, or are there other ways in which people can raise their voices for causes they care about?
No, I have complicated feelings on the subject. But I'm going to distinguish from everyone here who did raise their hands, and it was right of them to do it. But I think to actively say bar ki bhai, I'm a rebel, or you put it in your Twitter bio, or stamp it over here ki I'm a rebel, and you do that thing also. It's it's a bit performative, and this, by the way, has nothing to do with if Seher asks you ki bhai, raise your hand if you think you're rebellious, and you raise your hand. That's fine. But I've been quite suspicious of people who self-identify as rebels. I think being rebellious is like being successful. If you have to say you are, chances are you might not be. So there's that. The second thing is, I think I've taken positions or said stupid things that have disrupted my career in the past, or disrupted or affected personal equations as well. I don't know whether that goes into going against the system. Maybe it doesn't. I think if you're trying to be heard in this country, that's something on its own. But what I would add to this is why, like I teach at a law school as an adjunct also, and that's probably not the first thing I would incentivize for these young people. I think what Kev said is totally right. कि यही आपकी उम्र है. This is the time where you take strong positions. This is the time where you say, things are not just about gray zones. There is a black, there is a white, and it's very important to call it out and actually live your life accordingly. Having said that, though, I think for very many people, they don't have those social protections. They don't have those structures around them, whether at home or in the workplace. And many times when I've seen someone, like knife the person next to them or something and just, take a step ahead, I haven't judged them because I think they come from a position where, well, you do what you have to do. Is it ideal? No, it's not ideal. But I just wish that we were part of a system that had those social protections or that had that professional window where you were able to take these positions, manifest them, do these things that were off the beaten path, where there weren't such massive repercussions. I think I do them more than often because I can get away with it. I think very many people can't get away with it, which is why I wouldn't really encourage them to try and do something. So that's what I think about this subject. आपने जो औरत मार्च की बात की थी, and that sign that said मोजे खुद ढूंढो. There were so many people that I spoke to, and I get it. They were actually shocked. मोजे खुद ढूंढें, खाना खुद गरम करें. And it's not it's not something that's incomprehensible because I think 10 years ago you couldn't get something like Auric March. I don't think you could get a bunch of girls going out in the street and saying "Moze khud dhondo, khana khud garam karo." And I think I agree with both what Kef and Emmer said, which is while the amplification of that sound was elite centric, you did cater to a lot more segments of society. Like, even in addition to that, every movement or every protest or every demonstration does start somewhere. Now, this might be, for the purpose of this conversation, this might be totally elite-centric and totally unrepresentative. And Bilki Sidi might be absolutely right when she says कि भाई ये इस खातून को जो stretcher पे आई है उसको किस तरह cater करता है. But the fact is that this conversation was not happening 10 years ago. And I think 10 years from now, people are going to be holding up signs that are going to be even more radical than, मोज़े खुद ढूंढो, and I'll be reading them and thinking, ये किस तरह मुझे ये कह सकते हैं? How dare they? Because it's an immediate reaction when you read those signs, speaking as a man, which is, how did this happen? And I think that's the impact that something like Auric March does, which is it forces you to rethink your own position. It forces you to rethink कि भाई, I did actually win the gender lottery, and now I can say कि भाई इन सारी लड़कियों को इस तरह के साइन नहीं उठाने चाहिए. How dare they? Once you started down that conversation, you raise awareness, and I think that awareness tends to change your behavior, and your tone starts to improve, or at least it starts becoming a degree more inclusive. So I think that's definitely a conversation that we need to have, regardless of the male gham o ghussa that comes out as a reaction. That's what I would say.
Thanks, Asad. We hope in 10 years you will not be experiencing gham o ghussa at the.
I meant as an expression.
No, we hope you will continue to evolve and grow and not experience gham o ghussa. But because I think people have been experiencing a lot of gham and gussa, not just because of Auric March, but because, garmi bahut hai aur bijli nahi aa rahi aur naukri nahi mil rahi, or there's a whole host of issues that people, or COVID hai aur mask bhi pehenna pad raha hai aur bahar bhi nahi ja sakte. So people have been, it's been a tough time for everybody. So I just wanted to end off by asking all of you some quick, rapid wisdom questions that you can offer people who are watching, for things that you would recommend for them to do. So my first question is, give us, and you have to do this very, very quickly, okay? I'm going to call on you and then you have to instantaneously answer. Give us a book, a website, a blog, something that you think people must read. Ramsha, first.
Besides my own,
Yes.
I think Permanent Record by Edward Snowden.
All right. So read Ramsha's articles and Permanent Record. Emma, what are you recommending people read?
There's a book I read by Manan Ahmed called Jachnama, the Book of Conquest. And it's a wonderful book on basically the Muhammad bin Qasim, but really on how the history of Pakistan and Muslim India had been constructed to follow certain narratives.
Awesome.
It's a really,
Asad,
really
what's on your
excellent
reading
read.
list?
No, having read both of them, I would strongly recommend Ramsha's articles and Jachnama.
But you have to give us an original answer also. You can't
I know. But those were solid though. In my can I go at the end? I'll go at the end.
All right. Sabah?
My tweets. Why not pump myself up? But I would say if you're interested in getting to read entertaining stuff that also covers a lot of intersectionality, Galdem, GALDEM magazine.com. That's an awesome place to go and get some reading done. A lot of Pakistani contributors there. And also, if you're looking to break the hell away and just read some romance like this, support some Black authors out there. Jasmine Guillory has a series of books. They're awesome, easy reads, funny, chemistry, food. Go for it. Also, read a lot more about food. It's very relaxing on all the websites.
Excellent. That's very good recommendation. Kef, what would you recommend?
No books at all. I think I would rather have people go out and experience and experiment on their own. Because reading a book is a privilege. Not many, 80% of our society cannot afford. So I mean, ये private schools में आपको सिखाया जाता है, government schools में कहीं पे भी book पढ़ाने का कोई तरीक़ेकार नहीं है. तो बाहर जाएं और enjoy करें और experiment करें.
Asad, are you recommending a book or not recommending?
Yes. I think you should read anything by Pankaj Mishra, and I would strongly recommend that everyone should read as many books as they can. It is the only reason I'm literate. I learned nothing in school and just read a lot of books, and that's the only reason I can form coherent sentences. So read anything, read whatever you want. Pankaj Mishra is very good. And whatever recommended is very good. And if you can read Ramsha on the monsters or the digital hellscape that social media is becoming, I strongly recommend that as well.
Okay, excellent. Now moving on to something a little more fun. Give us an Instagram account, a TikTok user, a Twitter handle, someone that you like to follow. It doesn't have to be someone that you necessarily learn new things from. It could just be something that's really fun. It could be a YouTube channel, something that you would do for fun. Emma, you first.
So there's this Instagram page called 2030 Mama. It's run by this journalist called Sahar Habib. And basically 2030 is the year her daughter turns 18. And so the Instagram is about parenting, but it's also, she's around my age. And so it's also about like navigating this, new world and how kids are dealing with it. And then talking about her own childhood experiences and memories and everything. It's really one of the most magical accounts on Instagram. You really get surprised by how relatable it is, even if you're not a parent or a mom or whatever. So I'd highly recommend it. It's 2030 Mama, 2030 Mama at Instagram.
Thank you. I would like to, thumbs up that recommendation. And the reason Sabah, Banu, Malik and I are so excited about it is because Sahar is part of our comedy troupe. She is also part of Auric March. So yes, definitely go support her. She's awesome. Sabah, next to you, what's Instagram, TikTok, YouTube thing that
I was
you're following?
actually trying to find the Instagram account. I don't remember the name, but if you guys know what I'm talking about, it's this person who documents old Asian immigrants in New York couples who dress alike. Like she'll walk up to a bodega and there'll be like a 9-year-old Korean couple and they're dressed alike. I think that account is just beautiful for style reasons and because you get to learn their stories. Another thing I've been doing again, it's actually Korean related. There's this YouTube niche called mukbangs. I know I'm very late to it, and basically it started kind of fetishy and creepy, where like skinny people just ate a ton of food. But I found an account that does true crime stories while eating a ton of food, and I'm newly gluten free, so it just feels so good to watch other people eat dumplings. And it's called Sesame Sue. And also, if like me, you hate the sound of people chewing, it's great because she doesn't chew that much.
Okay, that sounds very soothing and relaxing. Asad, is there like something that you're following?
Well, I try to stay away from Instagram as much as possible, though I use all of their hashtags. I do hashtag blessed, hashtag living in 3000, and then, kids half my age say that you're a boomer saurus, and then I have to Google what boomer saurus is. It's very, very confusing. Lekin, if as a website, I think people should look at the Literary Hub. It's not pretentious at all. It's on fiction, poetry, criticism, and every time my own social media becomes some political conflict or some battlefield, so I just put in something insipid like 7 book recommendations for the summer weekend, and you sort of bring some variety into that. So I would strongly recommend lithub.com.
Awesome, thank you. And Kef, what would you recommend?
So this guy on Instagram, he's really funny. He's like a chacha ji, and all. कभी वो train के सामने आके train से हट जाता है, या कभी अपने motorbike पे घूम रहा है. His TikTok account is I've got him here open here. It's called @JamSafdar0786. He's extremely hilarious. I would definitely tell people to.
Is he the one who does all the funny backgrounds? Like sometimes he's flying on an eagle and then...
Exactly. And the other one, really new and not many, or maybe they are following, it's called Swinery. And I think that it's interesting. Okay. I thought it's hilarious. It's politically charged. It's humorous. It's wonderful.
I like the koala.
The what?
The koala is very cute. What is everyone's favorite Swinery character? Quickly, go.
Alien.
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 The koala.
Zulekha के जो आशिक हैं, जो बड़े मियाँ जो हैं.
Oh, cute, yes. What about you, Sabah?
I like the owl and the alien. I would say the owl and the alien are my favorite.
No one likes Shazia's daughter?
Shazia's daughter, hater.
Ah,
The character hates Shazia's daughter. She's not Shazia's daughter.
it's also
Yes.
funny.
Avocado halwa lover and Shazia's daughter hater.
Yeah.
Shazia's daughter hater is too real for me. So I stick with the koala.
The real one is that guy who's come back from abroad. Because
That's
I know
why-
I've been that guy, and I know I've been friends with that guy.
I know those.
We all know that guy.
That one hits too. That hits too close.
It is. It is too
So
close.
moving a little bit away from home, my next question is there like if you were to tell people to follow a public figure or a celebrity, who would that public figure or celebrity be?
Oh.
Ramsha, who would you choose?
No one's worth it.
What? You could just say me, follow me. People should follow Ramsha.
One follow less for the day.
I wanted to actually recommend Irfan Juneja for this, who's a Pakistani YouTuber, and he's really a really creative artist. He's somebody who has also really great politics and good ethics. Like it's not something that he came with, but he's really like educated himself and consistently taken really good stances on things, and is just super talented. I think for a lot of young people, he represents a sort of career path and a way of taking on this new economy that a lot of them can look up to. both his ambition as well as his humility, and he's just like a really amazing creator. So if you haven't come across his work as yet, YouTube पे जाके इरफान जुनेजो search करें, you will really love it. Particularly his thing on Karachi ke burger and bun kebab. He did this amazing video on it. I highly recommend watching it.
Yeah, so there's actually a lot of creative talent that has come up in Pakistan that we're seeing on social media, whether it's Jam Safdar or Irfan Junejo. Kef, is there someone who you're following?
I don't follow, but I look forward to the tweets and the videos. That's Meera ji. I love her. I think she's absolutely
too.
gorgeous and politically so incorrect that it's just a breath of fresh air listening to her.
I think she's beautiful. Big fan of the Miraji also, right here. Sabah?
Well, when COVID started, I was really one of the people who was like down with celebrity culture. We gotta end them all. But I'm gonna move away, not for influencer reasons, but because if one of the good things that have come out of this is the music. Manu's music, Abdullah Siddiqui, Natasha Noorani, they just put out stuff randomly. Like it'll just hit you on a Wednesday and suddenly they have a new song. And I think they're really worth listening to. Abdullah Siddiqui just dropped an EP that was just stunning. Taha Ji, another musical artist here in Pakistan, I would say definitely follow just for the music and the covers that they do are really lovely.
Great. And Asad, the final word from you. Who should people follow?
No, I think on the music side, although Sabah and Amir would know more, Natasha Noorani is very good. There's this band called Janubi Khargosh that was very, very good. On the music side, on the YouTube side, I don't agree with a lot of his columns, but I think people should subscribe on a political plane to anything Sohail Wadaich does in terms of his interviews. One thing that I've noticed is that because of the inflection of his voice, he's able to ask some seriously profound and vulnerable questions. I mean, they make the other person like totally. What he does is he lulls the other person into the sense of security, and so the other person is able to tell you his life secrets. I mean, I won't really get into the litany of the deeply personal questions he asks right at the end, but it's an experience in psychology, sociology, and current affairs to see a Sohail Wadaich interview. So that's what I'd close
Can
on.
I just fanboy on Sohail Wadaich a little bit?
Absolutely.
Because it's such a good call by Asad. I feel if you're a young journalist, you really should look at his interviews because what Asad just pointed out, he is mind-blowingly good at this. And when you rewatch them a few times, or if he's interviewing someone you also pick up on how subtly he brings those things into it. So I remember one of my favorite questions is that he asked Nargis about whether she had a bigger bathroom or Deedar. And it was really tied into the fact that he explained it because the size of the bathroom was one of the major things that Pakistani actors judged each other on. And it's a brilliant insight into your society that I don't think any other journalist will ever provide you. And it's with serious stuff as well. So I mean, obviously, this is coming in from celebrity culture, but I really would second Asad on this. Really look up his stuff. He's deceptive, and don't think he's that good, but he's probably the best.
Yeah, I endorse it too, definitely.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for this really fun and interesting, wide-ranging conversation about the issues that young people face and how they can be negotiated, and how young people are both, sort of learning, how they're being playful, and how they're also having their voices heard, and how they're using new mediums, traditional mediums to rebel and also to be resilient in these difficult times. And so we'll curate some of the answers that you've given us, the tips you've given on who to follow, what to do, what to listen to. And I particularly want to thank you all for highlighting the incredible wealth of talent that exists in Pakistan around art and culture. I really think that's both, something that you can go to for resilience, but also to seek inspiration and to seek some optimism about the future of Pakistan. Big thank you to Jinnah Institute for organizing this conversation and allowing us to talk about ways in which we can both be resilient and rebellious and create social change to help realize Jinnah's vision of a more egalitarian, equitable, a more just and a more tolerant society. And thank you to all the panelists for being part of this, and thank you to Jinnah Institute for organizing this.
Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Seher.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.